Rebar. Construction debris usually buried in concrete. Most people see scrap. I see a future knife. Today, this rod becomes a functional blade. Welding on a handle. You've got no business in the forge without one. The steel here is usually mid-carbon, like A500C. It's not tool steel, but for a working knife, it'll do just fine. Forging range, 1650-1920 DRF. Any lower, the metal fights back. Higher, and you're burning the structure. Under the hammer. The first pass is about killing that ribbed profile and getting a flat billet. The metal flows exactly where you direct it. Reheat. Drawing out the bar, leveling the cross-section. Every forging cycle refines the grain. That's not poetry, it's physics. A forged blade will always outperform one that's just stock removed from the same steel. Stripping the scale, revealing the clean meat underneath. 60 grit belt on the grinder. Right now we're just seeing what we've got. If there are no cracks or delaminations, it means the forge work was clean. Marking the profile. Center tip on the axis for maximum piercing strength. On the spine, the layout for the future serrations. We draw it now because once the sparks start flying, there's no time for thinking. Angle grinder for the contour. Now, the teeth. Using a cut-off wheel to make notches along the layout. Even spacing, even depth. One crooked tooth and the knife looks like a garage hack job. It's tedious work, but vital. By the way, how do you like these rebar serrations? Let me know in the comments. And subscribe if you're into honest metalwork. After the rough cut, those teeth need a cleanup. We use a carbide burr to remove burrs and sharp internal corners. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. If you leave them raw, micro cracks can form during the quench. Drilling pinholes, mandatory before heat treat while the steel is still annealed. Next up, the most critical part, the bevels, starting to form the cutting edge. This takes a steady hand and a sharp eye. The grinder doesn't forgive mistakes. A 40 grit ceramic belt eats metal aggressively. Our task is to grind flat, symmetrical planes. Hold the angle tight so the plunge lines don't wander. After the grinder, we move to hand sanding and flap discs, removing deep scratches, prepping the surface for the finish. The blade must be spotless before the quench. Any deep scratch will turn into a nightmare to sand out once the steel is hardened. Moment of truth. Heating to 1550 degrees, 850 grassi. The magnet won't stick. It's time. We're quenching in water. For rebar, it's a risk. It could snap, but we need maximum hardness. Hissing, steam, checking the ring. A clean ring means the knife loves. If you were worried about the blade too, hit that like button. Handle, wood. 2 scales, brass pins. Drilling through the tang to make sure everything aligns without surprises. Fitting, adjusting, checking the seat. You can't just hope it'll tighten up later. If there's a gap or a wobble during the dry fit, it'll only get worse. Fit it tight. The pins should go in firm. No forcing, but no play. The handle is the interface between the knife and the hand. If it's loose, the knife is useless, no matter how pretty it looks. A good handle starts with the fit, not the shape. If the foundation is crooked, no amount of sanding will save it. Oil on the wood, soaking it in, rubbing it down. The texture pops, the wood darkens. This is the final touch. After this, the project officially becomes a knife. Here it is, from a piece of rusty rebar to a functional tactical tool, testing it on a grain sack. One swing and the steel passes through the fabric like air. A clean cut. Let me know what I should make the next knife from. See you in the forge. Work is done.